En este panel nos acompañará la doctora Rosina Wilcher. Ella es de Barbados, doctora en ciencia política, ha trabajado por 16 años en el Programa para el Desarrollo de las Naciones Unidas de la Organización de la ONU y ha sido jefa de observaciones electorales con la OEA en Santa Lucía el 2011 y en Antigua Barbuda 2014. Actualmente se desempeña como primera promotora de CARICOM para la justicia de género. También nos acompaña en el panel el doctor Frankel Almayer, quien es embajador de Estados Unidos, ha servido como embajador de Estados Unidos en Honduras y ha sido también secretario de Administración y Finanzas de la OEA aquí en Washington. Con nosotros ha sido observador de misiones electorales en Granadinas el 2010, en Belice 2012 y en San Kitts y Nevis el 2015. También nos acompaña Adam Blackwell, quien es canadiense, es diplomático de carrera, ha servido en Congo, Nigeria y Kenia y ha sido secretario de Asuntos Multidimensionales, es actualmente, secretario de Asuntos Multidimensionales de la organización. El doctor Blackwell también ha sido jefe de misión con nosotros en República Dominicana en el 2010 y en Dominica 2014. Va a moderar el panel el secretario general adjunto de la organización, el embajador Randim. Adelante, embajador.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. I hope your lunch was good and you feel strong and inspired to participate. As the panelists have been introduced already, I won't go into introducing this well-experienced panel on Caribbean election observation missions. And you can read it in the documentation which you have received as well. So it gives us more time to have an engagement and to listen to each other as well as to the panelists. Let me say a couple of things up front. This morning when I spoke at the opening, I raised in general terms some of the issues with regard to election observation. And first of all, the importance of it, but secondly, also important, the recognition member states see in this process. And that's something which we have to really capture. Because there are two players in this, the election observers on the one hand, but the country in which they are operating. So you need both sides to be well informed and cooperating. Otherwise, there is no solid observation. I think this discussion, and once again we congratulate Gerardo Icaza with this initiative because it's timely. There will be several elections in the Caribbean this year, 5 at least where we will be observing. And if others are willing to invite the OAS, the time is there. There are certain countries which have elections which have not invited the OAS as yet. And so from that perspective, it's a good moment to have a discussion on election observation in the Caribbean. Let me say this then as a second point, and I hope the panelists can maybe illustrate that point with some examples. The Caribbean is seen as a homogeneous collection of states, but when it comes to election observation or election processes, it's not an homogeneous state, collection of states. From a political perspective, there are differences in the political systems between the English-speaking Caribbean, more based on the Commonwealth system. We have the Dutch-speaking Caribbean with much more the Netherlands, and then we have also the French with Haiti part of it. So these are all different political systems, and as a consequence also different electoral processes. So we have to keep that in mind when we observe elections. There is no uniform model which can be applied to the Caribbean, although it is 50 nations, 40 nations as a member of the Organization of American States. They're quite different from each other. Also within the English-speaking Caribbean, you will find differences in terms of the organizational layout, the machinery of elections are quite different. And it's going to be great to listen to the three presenters here in terms of their experience with regard to the observation experience they had. So I want to start with a question to the three panelists, just to give them an opportunity to speak to some of the issues they have experienced. But let me ask you all to respond to this question. As a chief of mission, if you could indicate in the countries where you were a chief of mission, what kind of common challenges you see which you have faced in these electoral system. But I want to be also, at the same time, positive and constructive. I want you to reflect also on what good things you saw, not only the difficulties, but tell us also about the good things. And if you have a very good experience, a nice experience, and I do not mean a good experience at the beach or something like that, but give me a good experience of what is really as an example that can be duplicated elsewhere. Let's start with Rosina. For different reasons, you get priority.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking the OAS and the excellent teams with which I have worked. Some of you are in the audience. That's one of the real pluses of the experience of observing elections. I would say the Caribbean has a long history, particularly the English-speaking Caribbean, of democratic electoral processes, democratic traditions. And some of the commonalities are that there is an increasing level of societal violence, which is undermining these processes. The rising cost of elections and external money flows in the context of very small size, as well as a growing citizen disaffection with the electoral process. The electoral observer missions have been welcomed, and I think that's one of the positives is that we are invited, and I would not actually support the recommendation that was made this morning that we go in sort of surreptitiously before, because I think that would undermine the strength of what we bring to the process. What we have been able to do is to place a spotlight on the issues that can have a fundamental impact on undermining this process, and as well as the positive, enhancing the capacity of the government and citizens, as well as the donor community, to respond to support and monitor the recommendations. And in fact, I have met with the donor community organized by the local OAS rep of the community in Barbados covers most of the English-speaking region to follow up on the recommendations. The major issues that we have faced are the gender issues, in spite of the fact that the Caribbean began very early with a female prime minister, female president. We have, in fact, several years later, found ourselves behind many of the countries of the world in terms of female participation at the highest levels of political governance. And that's a human right that the OAS has a role to play and is accepted in sort of bringing to the fore. The other issue is electoral financing. In one of the countries, one of the commentators said, you know, this government is trying to buy us. It has put a lot of money into the process, but we are not for sale. This was an ordinary citizen to whom we spoke. But the lack of electoral financing, clear electoral financing laws, is a common issue, challenge that we have faced. The migrant vote, many of the Caribbean countries have populations that are larger than actually living outside than living inside. And there's a common issue of what parameters have to be established to ensure that we do not have the outsiders who have less of a stake than those living inside, having a greater voice than those who are resident in deciding the elections. And I would end by saying that the EOMs are too important a process to be dependent on handout, or well, on sort of going to the trough after every request. There needs to be an established fund so that the OAS can respond in a prompt and effective manner to the requests that come. I will stop there.
Thank you very much. That's it. You raised two specific issues which we will follow up on, and I'm sure the audience will come back to that: the issue of campaign financing and the issue of gender. But before we go into those substantive discussions, Adam Blackwell, your perspectives on the challenges and the good things.
Thanks very much, Ambassador Ramdeen and Rosina and Frank. It's a privilege to be here. And I think that's how I would start. It is a privilege and an honor to wear the jacket of the OAS and lead an electoral observation mission. We have a great team who does miracles with very little resources. I think there's two problems that I'd like to pick up on. One is we need our donor countries, or countries who are partner countries who are interested in helping finance electoral observation missions, to establish budgets early and often, so that we have the resources to be able to deploy teams on time. And I think the other thing that's really important is to get invitations on time. Some of the parliamentary systems, including hopefully in Canada, have new electoral laws which established fixed date elections, which should make it a little easier to invite the OAS and other observers on time. I agree in what I have seen, the three issues really that you raised: gender, financing. I think the other obvious issue is electoral lists and roles, especially when concerns the diaspora. Because the big difference between the Caribbean or the parliamentary system is that, of course, each constituency counts. In Dominica in 2009, I think one constituency was decided by one vote. So a very important difference in terms of how governments are eventually formed in the parliamentary system. So I think we really need to bear that in mind. I think the other thing I would say as an electoral observer is it's not about us. It is about working with the electoral observation authorities in a particular country, working with them, in the shadows, really, to help make and eventually give them comfort that the process has been followed. To me, it's a question of norms, standards, and process, and we are there to help assuage or encourage people to follow those various processes, and eventually work with electoral authorities to, I won't say certify the results, but to at least leave the electorate feeling that the results are a reflection of their wish. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm happy you said it's not about us, because that's a critical part there, because having been part of this process in Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I'd like to welcome the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Welcome, Jose Miguel. In Jamaica, Guyana, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think the role, the way you present yourself as Chief of Mission in the process is critically important for several reasons: acceptance, honest participant or bystander in the process. That's critically important. Frank Almaguer is a known figure in the OAS, But Frank raised the question with me, which has nothing to do with election observation, but I want to raise it because when we started it just now, Frank said, are we going to start on time? And it was 2 o'clock, and we started on time. So, Frank, time has changed in the OAS. Frank Almaguer, your experience in St. Kitts and Nevis, most recent.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is the mic on? Yeah, okay. First of all, I'm honored to be back at the OAS and honored to have the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General and my fellow panelists. I've had a number of roles at the OAS, but probably none have given me as much pleasure as having served as head of the electoral observation missions in Honduras. That was a difficult one, but Belize, St. Kitts, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines before that. And something I would like to mention, you don't get a program like the Electoral Observation Mission established so quickly, so effectively in a country, unless you have top-notch, dedicated OAS staff. And I have been consistently impressed, and I can say this now that I am not part of the OAS staff, that the first thing that has impressed me as I have begun to prepare for a mission has been the commitment of the men and women of the OAS General Secretariat who prepare us for the role. And that is not only true getting there, but as we experienced in the most recent one in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we were up 18, 20 hours a day for a critical period, that everybody was there. Everybody was engaged and productive and working as a team. And when I'm asked, can you tell me some, 3 or 4 major OAS programs that you consider to be the essence of the OAS? The Electoral Observation Mission Program is one of those, absolutely, which will get me to the bottom line issue, which is there has to be a mechanism in place to allow these missions to respond to requests, whether they come early or later, in a manner that does not involve having to worry about how do you pay for the hotel room of your staff. That is a troublesome issue. Having been Secretary of Administration and Finance, obviously I think about those issues, and I would hope that soon the OAS will have a designated fund that would allow it to marshal its skill set to observe missions. The second thing that I want to talk about is that, when we start looking at what's going to go in the country or what's going to happen there, we worry about the politics and we worry about a variety of the logistics and so on. But what really has impressed me is that on election day, the voters show up, despite the fact that oftentimes we say, they haven't done a good job of organizing or promoting where the polling stations will be and so on. People do show up, and this is why you get 75, 80% turnout rates, even on a weekday. And I say this coming from a country where we're lucky if we get 50% of the voters to vote on a presidential election, and as many as 10% show up for a local election. And so when you get figures like 75%, it is quite impressive. Related to that, it's the quality of the people who manage the polling stations that has impressed me enormously. Even when we have been anticipating issues going into the election, when we get there, we find the receiving officers, the clerks, the party observers are almost always there, almost always on time, almost always committed to doing what is right. And one of the things that I observed while I was in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I've done this in other settings, is to look at the political party observers and how they're handling their responsibility. And despite all of the rhetoric that goes into the political side of the campaign, once they get into that polling place, these observers from the respective political parties seem to interact with each other in a very supportive and professional manner. The other issue comes about it's more the logistics of the country itself. Clearly, we're dealing with small countries where maintaining a well-trained, well-prepared staff is difficult. But even when that is true, I have been very pleasantly not only surprised, but I've learned a great deal. I will have to single out one. I'm not sure there's a representative here from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but when I observed that election, I learned so much from the supervisor of elections. She knew what she was doing. She was stern. She understood our role, but she was respected by the political leaders in the country and respected by the media and others, that she would do what was right. And it worked very, very well in that setting. Clearly, one of the elements of a successful electoral observation mission program is to help prepare election officials for that role. And there are people in the region who already possess the skill set to become trainers for nearby country electoral offices. The other item that I would like to mention is that while it is true that we are observers and therefore must sit back a bit and observe, I have found it very, very useful going into a country to sit down with as many of the local actors as one can, to understand the setting, understand the dynamics, and the issues that trouble them. And I'm not including only the officials, the politicians, but also civil society, the media, religious groups, others who can help explain some of the challenges that the country faces as it goes through the electoral cycle. And this is particularly important for the chief of the Electoral Observation Mission, because come the day or the hours after the election, I know that in every one of the ones that I have attended, I've had to either get on the phone or go and visit some of these very important officials to try to either understand or to provide our perspective on what may have happened. And having had that contact beforehand is absolutely critical. And it's a tool that I certainly would recommend for all chiefs of electoral observations to really get to know the key players that you may have to interact with after the elections. Money, I know this is going to be a central issue, and I see that the clock has expired. But it is a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere. It's not exclusive to the Caribbean. We certainly see it in the United States and in almost every country in the Western Hemisphere and elsewhere, I fear, that it is very difficult to understand the dynamics of what goes on without tracing the money. And just one interesting observation, going back to your point, in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, like in the case of so many other Caribbean countries, a large percentage of the voters come from overseas to vote. And when you see on the day before the elections, the airport tarmac full of 767s and executive jets, you have to wonder, well, where's this money coming from? And even though we may be posing that question, I don't know how the voters feel about it, but I suspect that it is an issue with them, and it does tend to weaken the democratic process. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also I see the Secretary General calling for We have heard basically all elements in general, of an election observation mission that require the attention of not only the OAS, but also from the chief election officers in country, the issue of electoral lists, the process, the staffing. For me, two key things which were raised here, apart from the fact that all three panelists are advocating a fund so that we have a predictable amount of money for mounting election observation mission. I think so far Gerardo has been able to be convincing to member states, but I understand the need for that. But going to the other side, the country itself, and I would like the audience to start thinking about questions so that once we finish with this, it's your turn to challenge the three panelists here. Just wanted to go a little bit deeper on one or two issues. One is the issue of campaign financing. And including in that, I would say, given the fact that the cost is rising in many countries, we spend a lot of money on campaigns. Questions are being raised not only from where it comes, but whether it is morally responsible to spend so much money on a campaign for one day. But also the other side of it, the use of government resources, especially also access to media. I have experienced that these three questions are raised by political parties as being discriminatory depending on who is in power. What's your experience? Let's start with Rosina and do the same order.
Well, it seems to me that there needs to be a following of good practice where media time is designated free for each party, where there are limits to how much a party can pay in advertising. The OAS ran a program of electoral financing in the Caribbean, and there was not as great a positive response as I would have liked to have seen, because I think many of them, certainly the parties in power, feel that they benefit from the loose arrangement that now exists. And there is no doubt in my mind that if we keep going down this road, we are in danger of serious undermining of the democratic process. So for me, it's yes, there are problems. We know that there are countries, there are practices which can be followed in addressing those challenges through legislation. And the OAS, supported by donors and with strong internal support as well, should continue to promote strengthening electoral financing laws. I just wanted to add a piece that has not, it came up in the first panel, but one that has not arisen. But I see these missions as a way of building capacity as well locally, and Frank referred to it. But we have included students in the region, university students, who have benefited significantly and who serve to create a body of capacity, built capacity in the country to moving forward. The last point I want to make is that Frank made mention of the quality of the people managing the elections. What I want to say is that in our region, 90% of those people are female. The women manage the elections, they manage the party observation dimension of it. The key is that they are not there when it comes to the actual people elected, and they're given a very hard time. All manner of personal information is dug up when they seek to present themselves, and we have to do better. And this is one area that I think that the OAS needs to keep sort of pushing on.
Thank you very much, Rosina. I fully support your view in terms of embedding young students, young persons, students or otherwise, as a percentage of the election group, but I would expand it to include some others, because this is a political process in a sense, and I know that possibly in that small category of observers we can maybe include also, and we have done so in the past, permanent representatives to the OAS to create more political understanding of this process, but also OAS staff members throughout the organization to create ownership, understanding, and that helps a lot in the process of finding money, I think, and allocating resources. So those three categories should, I think, be included, not as a majority of the composition, but a small group. In terms of the participation of women in politics, a lot of work needs to be done domestically. The question is, and I want to add this to the earlier question I posed, do we follow the experience in some other countries where it is legislated? Would you like to comment, Adam and Frank, on this?
Well, that's a loaded question, Ambassador. I mean, my grandmother was a suffragette who died at 92 years of age with a criminal record. And that was in England in the early 20th century. I mean, I think that what we should be doing is encouraging and facilitating the participation of women in elected positions. I'm not sure whether putting ceiling or quotas is the way to go. I mean, that's a whole other argument. I certainly agree with what I've just heard. The quality of the electoral staff in Dominica was far superior, for example, to that which I have seen elsewhere in the world. They were very well prepared, very disciplined, almost fastidious in terms of how they process this. So I think it is an excellent area of horizontal cooperation and something we should really tap into. But I do agree that the real issue of electoral financing, the importation of, or the potential, or the perception of importation of votes, and where this financing is coming from is a huge issue. And I don't think it's fair to single out any one particular country. I know in Canada, for example, we've just passed very strict legislation to try and reduce the cost and time of campaigns and the cost of campaigns. Whether that's a model, I don't know. But it is something that needs to be looked at very quickly. In my day job, Secretary of Multidimensional Security, I mean, one of the huge issues that we're looking at is the illicit financial flows. And we're talking about an illicit economy of over $3.7 trillion globally. Obviously, some of this is going to make its way into some of these processes, which will tilt the results. So I think that this issue of electoral financing, tracking the source and understanding how these electoral rolls work is work left to be done.
No, your point is taken. Nobody looks forward to a situation whereby Caribbean politics, Caribbean democracy is tainted by so-called gray money from wherever and whatever kind. Frank, a quick response, and then we'll go to the audience.
Let me address the gender issue because it was a significant one when we were in St. Kitts and Nevis. 22 candidates, 21 men and 1 woman. The woman won her seat. She was an incumbent. Yet in every meeting that we attended before the elections, there were women placed in key positions, either within the political party or in civil society. And so we posed this question: how come there's only 1 woman running for office? And the answer was the same one, irrespective of who we were talking to. And that is that politics gets to be such a dirty game, if you will, in terms of people using the the opportunity to run for office to spread rumors or what have you about the opposing candidate. And that puts women in a very difficult situation. And that's the example that was given to us in every case, that women find it very difficult to put up with the kind of attacks, personal attacks, that often come with the privilege of running for office. And so there's an issue there that I think male politicians need to address, because clearly they're losing the advantage that they have of having key, well-prepared, well-educated women who are excluding themselves from the electoral process. With regards to the money issue, you know, it's easy to talk about campaign financing, and all of us in our respective countries have had those discussions. But it would appear to me that the cost per vote in a relatively small setting like we find in the Caribbean, that cost per vote must be extremely high. And it almost defeats the whole purpose of having a campaign, particularly when you do not have massive media-related costs, which adds another element here, and that is that in almost every country, there usually is a state-run media outlet, the local TV channel or the radio station or the newspaper. And I think consistently we find that the media outlets would saturate their time with positive messages about the party in power, and silent with regards to the opposition. In our most recent example, St. Kitts and Nevis, that did not necessarily translate into victory for the incumbents. Quite the opposite. The other party won. But it is striking that if you're running in the opposition, how few outlets you have other than the mass rallies at the various different settings in the country.
Thank you very much. Frank? Gentlemen? Yes. Thank you very much, Frank, to be so frank. I know Adam has a question, but in the meantime, I would like to ask the audience, if you have questions, if you could raise your hand. And Adam, you wanted to add something to it? And Rosina also. Adam Black.
I don't think it's working. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Frank a question. I mean, read an article in the New York Times, I think it was last week, that the 2016 election, between now and actually having a president inaugurated in January of 2017, is going to cost upward of $5 billion. I mean, I can't believe that cost per vote is not higher here.
Adam is absolutely correct. Clearly, I could talk at length, this is not the setting, about what has been happening in the United States. But every country experiences the same thing, which is that the cost of conducting an election, not the mechanics, but the running for office, has become such an expensive proposition. Factor in a number of settings, I did not witness this in St. Kitts, but probably was there, the political parties bring in outside experts, usually charging international rates to come in and devise their campaign ads and their various campaign activities. And there has to be a limit to this, because at the end of the day, it rather separates the voters from the elected officials, and it weakens democracy. And so we all have a responsibility to figure out in our respective countries, how do we contain these costs so that politics doesn't become such an expensive endeavor?
Thank you very much. The point is taken. Elections cost a lot, and the question is whether it is justified given the circumstances, wherever that is. But let's stick to the Caribbean situation for now. Rosina, quick point, very quick.
I want to hear from the audience, but I can't let my colleague get away with it on this gender issue. I've worked all over the world, and it's clear that politics will always be dirty. The reality is, and the data show, that where you have special measures, women participate. And the Caribbean is now pretty much at the bottom of the scale because it has not introduced special measures. It's down with the Pacific countries as the lowest in female representation. So I cannot accept that we leave it to chance. We know that it will not change unless special measures are put in place. And to me, it is our responsibility to make that clear.
Good. No, not as yet. No. But the point is too important to be lost. We have questions from the audience. There was a gentleman in the back there. The young gentleman.
Thank you so much. My name is Gianluca Lorenzen. I'm from the Brazilian Federation. And I have the opportunity to be a student from Professor Ricardo Steinfuss, which was the representative of OAS to the Haiti. And in the subject of Caribbean elections, I remember that once he was lecturing us about how hard it was to OAS to sometimes have to disagree with local politicians about the importance of election procedures. And he reminds us about the project that was done in order to make sure that every citizen in Haiti had IDs in order to vote and to have a clear electoral process. So my question is, how the OAS think the future about its moral responsibility, if you can actually say that it has one, to help those Caribbean nations to enforce electoral procedures? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to that because we have done a lot of work in that sense, so we can respond to that. But let's get a couple of questions, and if the lady and gentleman would write some of the notes so that you know which question is being asked. This is about basically how to help citizens in terms of their knowledge about the system. Ambassador Stephen Faciani.
Thank you, and thanks to the members of the panel for the very interesting presentations and important presentations. I have two short questions. One is, in your experience, what has the relationship been like between OAS observers on the one hand and observer groups and missions from other entities? Have you found any special areas of emphasis on the part of the OAS versus others, that type of issue? And the second question is, when observers were initially contemplated, it may well have been that, for the Caribbean at least, they were seen as kind of arbiters as to the fairness of an election vote. But the observer reports go beyond just the actual voting to talk about financing and the gender equity issue and so on. Do you think that as you go beyond the basic question of the fairness of the vote, you run the risk of the host country saying, but those questions are for our polity, not for the observers to tell us how to handle it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and those are very pertinent questions and important questions. In terms of the first question, as it was about Haiti, I just want to say the OAS, through a special program, is providing to Haiti, where we have registered almost 6 million Haitians with an ID card, which is also the card used to vote. So I think we have made a lot of progress for the first time in the history in Haiti that Haitian citizens have an ID card available to them. But the same project on civil registry called PUICA in the OAS is providing technical assistance, capacity building assistance to many Caribbean countries in improving the level of registration of not only voters but citizens, and as such, out of that comes a voters list. So I think we have done a lot of work in that sense. And I would say beyond the election observation mission, PUICA is another flagship operation of the Organization of American States. But it's an important element, certainly, and maybe you all can go into this as well. In terms of the questions of Ambassador Vaziani, those are very clear in terms of our presence in relationship to others. In the Caribbean, mostly the Caribbean community and the Commonwealth, most of the time, and I think a good relationship is critically important. The second question is very important, and I hope you take some time to address this, is the general question about whether we observe an electoral process or a political process. And I know that we had several times discussions within the OAS about what the aim should be, but I will leave it to the panelists to answer those difficult questions, Ambassador. Frank, please.
Okay. Interesting and potentially difficult question, at least the second one. With regards to other observer missions, clearly in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, my most recent experience, we worked very, very closely with the Commonwealth Observation Team and with the CARICOM, which had a reduced presence, but our ability to engage with them and back and forth on issues both before, during, and after the elections was critically important. In fact, we came out with a joint communique on the day after the election, and certainly being able to work together and say the same thing reinforces the role of the observers. The question becomes whether one sort of runs into the question or the danger of stepping beyond the bounds of being an observer to becoming perhaps even an arbiter of decisions related to the electoral process. It's a tricky one. As some auditors in a different setting have said, that their job is not to comment on the policies of the organization, rather they audit against what you say your policies are. So if you have electoral rules, obviously we have to observe whether you're following those rules or not and make note of it. But I think that we do have a responsibility as objective observers representing an international institution to make relevant comments in an objective, nonpartisan manner about certain procedures or processes or even cultural patterns that could potentially detract from the fairness of an election. I recall one, and not in my most recent one, where the political parties were rather open about hiring people the day of the election. Kind of an interesting way of getting them to vote, but also, in effect, engaging in something that could be seen as troubling. So mentioning this could lead to a reaction saying, well, that's not your business. But the flip side of that is saying our business is to go back to the OAS, to the Permanent Council, and comment on patterns that we see that do detract from the perceived fairness of the process. So clearly the one thing we do not want to do is to become political arbiters of deciding or trying to decide outcomes, but rather the process.
Yeah, well, we also have worked very closely with other partners, other observer missions, and in Antigua Barbuda we had a breakfast meeting not just with those partners but all the diplomatic community to get a sense from them of what they saw as core issues. Now, and I would say with the other observer missions, we've actually divided the space so we don't, so we make sure that we cover the whole country. So it's a very collaborative process that has obtained in the missions that I have led. The question of what constitutes fairness is critical. There's nothing relating to our recommendations that we have ever sort of pulled out of a hat. They have normally come from people who we have interviewed, whether it's the commissions themselves, whether it's the trades unions, the faith-based communities, the other parties. These are issues that the citizens are telling us are critical to their expectation of a fair and democratic process. So it's not to talk about financing issues or gender issues. It's not going beyond the central question of whether this election actually is fair and supports democracy. It is central to the essence of that fairness and democratic process. So I don't see any contradiction between the two. Is that good?
Adam?
I think there's three things here. One, you asked a question about identity cards, and I would simply say it's part of the process. It's a very important part of the process, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I know one country that's very dear to me where selling and buying of identity cards is one of the businesses that happens on election day. I think the other thing, or the second piece to this, is the relationship with others, and obviously my colleagues have covered that. The last thing you want is when you are talking about the results to have mixed messages, and I think that's really key, and to make sure you do cover the whole country. And I think the third piece here, and Frank was touching on this, is the accountants would call it separation of duties. And I think this is the strength of the platform and the programs of the OAS. We do have a program called PUICA. We do have a department called Effective Public Management. The Electoral Observation Directorate is developing ISO and standards and norms and other programs that can help countries improve their processes. But on election day, we have a checklist, and we are there to evaluate the process, not the results. And I think if we stray from that, we can get ourselves in real trouble.
Thank you very much, panelists. Questions? Ambassador Henry Jacinth Martin of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I just want, on behalf of the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis, to express my appreciation to the OAS for the recent electoral observer mission headed by Ambassador Almaguer, and to say that I do believe, I can't speak on behalf of St. Kitts and Nevis, but certainly on behalf of the rest of the Caribbean countries, that the presence of the missions do provide some measure of comfort to all of the parties involved and to the electorate that democracy at work is being witnessed for and on behalf of the hemisphere. I wanted to comment on the issue of women in politics, having been in politics myself as an elected parliamentarian, and to say that I do note with keen interest the recent establishment of the Department for Social Inclusion here at the OAS. The OAS is seen as a leader in this hemisphere, and I believe that if this department were to be used to encourage, to give guidance on, to offer draft legislation on, mechanisms for moving forward the processes that will enable women to participate more, I don't want to say more actively, because I always say women are the most active. We lead from behind in the elections. And so perhaps instead of, and this is just me being overly aggressive on this issue, perhaps instead of it being just the Department of Social Inclusion, it can be the Department of Social and Political Inclusion, because I believe that is very necessary. I'd like to hear if there are any comments on that from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe it goes a little bit beyond the ambit of this panel, but feel free to comment on this. In terms of gender, I'd like to give a quick perspective on this. In terms of gender, and especially female participation in politics, I think it's a serious issue that needs to be a serious discussion as well, within countries in the first place. And I think there are a couple of avenues to start the discussion. One is through champions of those who have served in politics as females, and to bring this to the political agenda. But a discussion in political parties, whether assisted through, assistance from outside, the involvement at the level of the education systems in schools, and try to get young females, young women involved in these kind of processes. And then, of course, the issue of legislation and the parliamentary engagement. I think these three things together must give us a roadmap to increase participation of women. They are already engaged in the political process, but not at the appropriate level. And I think it can be done. I think sometimes it helps to legislate, but I think it's more setting the norm of making this part of society. And that's not the case as yet, for whatever reasons. But I think we need to have a roadmap towards this objective, and I'm sure that the OAS will work towards this, whether it is in social, political, or economic inclusion, for that matter. Other questions? Left or right side of the room? Not ideologically divided here. Please.
Excuse me, I speak Spanish.
Bueno, gracias.
Nuestra experiencia es que solo las cuotas abren la puerta de los parlamentos. Es incluso la experiencia de los países nórdicos. Los países nórdicos que tienen un alto nivel de participación de mujeres desde hace mucho tiempo tuvieron que consolidar esa participación con las cuotas. En el caso mexicano, nosotros somos un país muy paradójico porque varias mujeres teníamos una alta representación. Hubo un momento en que éramos dos presidentas de los partidos nacionales, dirigentes de grandes sindicatos, en fin. Pero no obstante la intención de estas presidentas de los partidos nacionales de que hubiese más mujeres, siempre hay una resistencia de los dirigentes políticos varones, y siempre su argumentación es de carácter personal, nunca es de carácter político. Entonces, esto ha ido cambiando en América Latina por las cuotas, como cambió en Europa por las cuotas, como cambió en África por las cuotas. Y finalmente, a mí me parece que en el Caribe inglés, donde existen sistemas parlamentarios, el tema de las cuotas es más complejo, porque es más fácil poner cuotas cuando solo va a repercutir en el poder legislativo, pero cuando va a repercutir en el legislativo y en el ejecutivo, la negociación de las cuotas es mucho más difícil. Pero estoy convencida que si la OEA quiere respaldar una mayor participación de las mujeres en la democracia en cuanto a la distribución del poder, es indispensable fomentar las cuotas.
Thank you very much. I think, again, the comparison of experiences and policy making in different countries in the region, but also globally, is going to be useful for the discussion. I know that the Republic of Guyana has a quota system, a legislated quota system in place. I know that, on the other hand, countries without quota system have seen female at the highest level in political participation. At least I can speak for my own country, which is Suriname, where we had two speakers of the House. Yeah, no, I'm not finished. And then several ministers, several members of parliament, but at the highest level. But I agree totally that a lot of work needs to be done to come to this point. And maybe legislation is one, or a regulation is one way to go. But I think if we want to put it in the mindset, then we need much more than just legislation, because legislation is just to fix a problem temporarily, but it's the mindset will keep this continuity. Let's go to another question in the room, if there are. Otherwise, we go back to the panel unless... No, I'm almost coming to an end of this panel. So one last round of questions. Anybody interested? No? Good. Not good, but I want to thank you then for your contribution. But I'm going to ask the panelists, because I want to end on a good note on this one. We have had a good discussion. I'm not going to summarize because we have been speaking and summarizing in between. But give me, each of you, really a good example, even if it is an anecdote, an illustration, in which the electoral process basically symbolized a well-organized election, committed elections at least, in the areas or in the countries where you observed. I don't know who needs more time, but Adam has been thinking for a long time. So let's start with Adam.
You know, it's as I said at the very outset here, an election is not about us, the observers. It's about the fiesta democrática and the electoral process and you know, hopefully producing a platform from the winning party that has inspired the votes of the population. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that I have seen excellent political platforms. I wish I could say that I have seen votes that follow you know, strategies and vision. Unfortunately, we become fairly tight into narrow transactions and what's going to happen for me tomorrow. And I think this is something that it's very difficult to spin in a positive sense. It's something we need to reflect on. It's something we need to think about. This whole kind of culture of now and immediacy does not really adapt itself very well to establishing a 10-year vision of a country and how you're going to form the bureaucracy and institutions to be able to deliver. What I think is very positive is the institutional strength that we have seen in many of these countries, as we have all talked about. I mean, the people who volunteer to go on election day and work 12, 16, 18-hour days in very hot, uncomfortable rooms is inspiring, and I think that they do an exceptional job. And I'd just like to come back to the issue of gender. And you know, we have to be careful what we wish for here and how we do this. We're talking about a parliamentary system here, and I know in Canada we tried with quotas, which didn't really work because it's hard to predict who's going to win a particular riding. And if the party with the most number of ridings becomes the party that leads the government. So it is a challenge in the parliamentary system, but the rules definitely have to change. And I don't know why it takes so long, but this cannot be a macho business. We need to change the rules.
Thank you very much, Adam, Frank.
Well, let me just say that from my experience, you know, we talk about democracy as part of the essence of who we are as a continent and represented here at the OAS. But that word comes to life when you see an electoral process. And it is almost, I don't want to exaggerate it, but it's almost a religious kind of event in which people line up to express their views in secret. And for those of us who every once in a while question the processes because we have money issues and other kinds of issues, at the end of the day, the voters are expressing their will. And for me, the experience in the Caribbean has been particularly telling because they have done it so well, so consistently over the years. And let me finish also on the issue of gender and the leadership role that the Caribbean can and does play. Several years ago, I don't know what the data shows now, but several years ago, out of about 190 ambassadors from various countries here in Washington, of those 190, 17 were women. Of the 17, 9 were from either the Caribbean or the Latin American countries. Almost all of them were Caribbean. So the Caribbean region, in particular, has already shown a great deal of leadership in having women represent the countries so effectively, as we see it in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis. And it is that leadership that the Caribbean can bring to the other countries in the Western Hemisphere, and we all have a lot to learn from the Caribbean on this.
Rosina?
I want to say clearly the electoral processes are well managed. They're dedicated people, citizens are committed. There is, however, in my view, a growing concern with the role of money. And can undermine significantly the gains. The role of the OAS as a comfort and the stature that it holds is invaluable and must continue. I will also end on gender. You talk about legislation and mindset. We have seen in India, where they started with the Panchayat Raj at the local level, the quotas, that once there was enormous skepticism initially, but now the research shows that people are much more comfortable with women in leadership. So the mindset has followed the legislation rather than the other way around. In addition, the Caribbean has been in the leadership. We had Eugenia Charles in the 80s. We had Janet Jagan. We have a lot of very competent women in significant leadership positions, including ambassadors. However, the resistance that my dear colleague talked about is strong when it comes to the political representation. And one prime minister or two prime ministers, as we have now, doesn't cut it. So we need the quotas. And as I have, around the world, we have seen evidence of different systems, including parliamentary systems, using this mechanism positively. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Great. Thank you very much, Rosina. I know this is going to be a next conference on gender involvement in the Caribbean. I want to end by just this real story that happened with regard to election observation. When I was at the CARICOM Secretariat, we started the process of election observation. And we had one, and I'm not going to mention the names of the countries here involved, but one chief of mission observed elections in one country and had to report back to the ministers of foreign affairs about what he had found. It was a he, that I must admit. And he started reporting about how well it was organized, how nice the people were, and how everything was well in place, how the political parties worked with each other very closely, bringing each other food. And he spoke about the culture of the country and all the good food and so on, up to a point after 50 minutes, one of the ministers interrupted him and said, "But tell us about the elections." So that is the picture you have about Caribbean elections, well organized, based on norms and values which are symbolic for the democratic nature of our people. But there are challenges for the future, and some of them we have raised here. Election, campaign financing, the issue of gender, the involvement of youth in the process, the use of technology, which we have not spoken about today, educational outreach, use of state resources, as well as access to media. These are all issues that need to be addressed. So while the general picture is a good one, I think we have a couple of things that we can improve on. And that is basically the message of this panel, I believe, that all things well, a lot still needs to be done to make it an example for the whole world. I want to thank you all for your insights and for your contribution, and to thank all of our guests here for their presence. Thank you all very much.